In the quiet town of Iziaha, where red dust covered the roads and the air smelled of roasted corn, there lived a young woman named Amara. She was known for her soft voice, kind heart, and strong faith. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, swept the small compound she shared with her grandmother, and went to the church to help clean before service. The townspeople often said, if goodness had a face, it would be Amara's. Her faith was her life. She believed that everyone who prayed, who sang hymns, and lifted their hands to heaven must also be pure inside. She trusted easily because her heart knew no deceit. One Sunday morning, as the choir sang joyfully, Amara noticed a new face among the musicians, a tall, well-dressed man with confident eyes and a warm smile. His name was Samuel. He played the drums with such passion that even the children outside stopped playing to listen. After the service, he greeted everyone politely and offered to help carry chairs. The elders nodded with approval. That young man will go far, they said. Amara felt drawn to him. He spoke gently and often quoted the Bible, his words flowing like honey. When he smiled, she felt safe. Soon they began to talk after church. Samuel would wait for her by the old mango tree near the gate, holding a small Bible in one hand and a hopeful look in his eyes. Weeks turned into months. He walked her home after choir practice, carrying her hymn book, asking about her dreams. Amara told him she wanted a peaceful life, a husband who prayed with her, children who grew in faith, and a home filled with laughter. Samuel would nod and say, "That is the same dream I have, Amara. Maybe God sent us to each other." The words made her heart bloom like the hibiscus flowers in her mother's old garden. Soon everyone in the church noticed the closeness between them. The pastor smiled knowingly. The women whispered, "They will marry soon." Then one Sunday after the final song, Samuel walked to the altar holding a small box. He looked at Amara, and in front of the whole congregation he knelt down. Gasps filled the hall. "Amara," he said, "you are my answered prayer. Will you be my wife?" The church erupted with joy. People clapped, shouted, "Amen," and sang praises. Tears filled Amara's eyes. She could hardly speak. Her hands shook as she said yes, and Samuel slipped a simple silver ring on her finger. The pastor blessed them, saying, "When God joins two hearts, no man can separate them." After the ceremony, the entire town buzzed with excitement. Even the women at the market stopped selling for a moment to talk about it. "Ah, Samuel is a good man," one said. "He prays with fire. Amara is lucky." But not everyone celebrated with blind joy. Sitting quietly at the edge of the crowd was Amara's grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, a wise old woman whose eyes had seen much of life. She watched the couple with a calm face, but her heart felt uneasy. Later that evening, when the noise had faded and only the sound of crickets filled the air, she called Amara to her side. "Child," she said softly, "you have chosen a man who prays loud and speaks sweetly. But remember, not every man who prays has a pure heart." Amara smiled, brushing her grandmother's hand gently. "Mama, you worry too much. Samuel is a good man. He helps people, he serves in the church, and everyone respects him. God himself must be happy for us." Mama Ifeoma sighed deeply. "I hope your eyes never cry for what your heart refuses to see," she whispered. But Amara didn't listen. She was lost in her dreams, dreams of wedding songs, colorful wrappers, and a home filled with laughter. She imagined waking up beside Samuel every morning, both of them praying before starting the day. Her grandmother's words became a distant echo in her mind, easy to forget. That night, as she lay in bed, the moonlight poured through the window. She smiled, thinking of Samuel's face when he called her, "My answered prayer." Her heart danced with joy. In her mind, the path ahead was bright, smooth, and full of blessings. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees, and the old house creaked with the weight of secrets the night carried. Mama Ifeoma sat by the window, watching the stars and murmuring a quiet prayer. She didn't want to break her granddaughter's happiness, but something deep inside told her that joy built on charm could turn to pain. Days passed and Samuel visited often. He brought small gifts, fruits, verses from the Bible, and smiles that melted everyone's heart. The neighbors began to call him Pastor Samuel, though he was not one. He prayed before meals, prayed before leaving, prayed when it rained, and prayed when it didn't. Everyone loved him more. Amara's love only grew. She started planning their future, where they would live, how they would decorate their home, and the names of their children. When Samuel suggested that they move to another town after marriage to start fresh, she agreed without hesitation. But one evening, as they sat under the mango tree where they first met, Samuel's face grew serious. "Amara," he said, "I want you to trust me completely. Marriage needs obedience. You must always listen to me. Even if others speak against me, remember, a good wife stays silent. Amara hesitated. His tone felt heavy, different from the gentle voice she knew. But love made her blind and she nodded. I trust you, Samuel. Always. As she walked home that night, she passed her grandmother sitting on the wooden stool again. The old woman looked at her, searching her face. Are you happy, my child? She asked quietly. Amara smiled, though her heart felt a small flicker of worry. Yes, Mama. I am. Her grandmother nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on her. Then may your happiness last longer than your blindness, she murmured. Amara didn't understand the words, not yet. To her, love and faith were enough. She believed that a man who knelt in prayer could never make her cry. But in Iziaha the elders often said, before you trust a hand that lifts in worship, watch the heart that beats beneath it. It was a warning Amara would soon learn the meaning of, one that would test her love, her faith, and her strength in ways she never imagined. After the engagement, Amara's world began to change, not all at once but slowly, like a quiet wind turning into a storm. At first she didn't notice the shadows hiding in Samuel's smile. He was still the man who prayed the loudest in church, who greeted everyone politely, and who spoke softly when others listened. But when the crowd was gone and the doors were closed, another Samuel appeared, one who liked control more than love. He began by correcting her gently. A good wife should talk less, he said one evening when she tried to share an idea about their wedding. Too many words make a woman lose her grace. Amara laughed softly, thinking he was joking. But when she spoke again, his eyes turned cold. I said enough, he murmured, and the tone made her chest tighten. She tried to forget it. Everyone said that marriage came with sacrifices, that a woman must learn patience. So she smiled and continued her sewing work. Her small shop in the marketplace was her pride. People came from nearby towns to buy her clothes because she sewed with love and care. But soon Samuel began to visit the shop too often. At first, Amara thought it was sweet. He brought her lunch, stayed to watch her work, and even helped her close up sometimes. But over time, his visits turned into surveillance. Why do you talk so much with your customers? He asked one day. They're just asking about their clothes, Amara said, confused. You laugh too much when that young man comes here, he replied. A good wife must be modest. Amara stared at him in silence, unsure what to say. She didn't want to argue. Instead, she whispered, I'll be careful. When she told her best friend, Chidinma, about it, her friend frowned. Amara, that doesn't sound like care. That sounds like control. But Amara shook her head. He just loves me too much. Maybe I need to understand him better. Chidinma sighed. Sometimes light hides darkness. Watch closely before you give your heart. Amara smiled, but her heart felt uneasy. That night she prayed. She knelt on the floor of her small room, her hands trembling. God, she whispered, if Samuel is not who I think he is, show me a sign. But no voice came from heaven. Only the sound of the night wind brushed against the windows. The next morning, Samuel came to visit her grandmother. He brought gifts, yams, palm oil, and a bright smile. Mama Ifioma, he said cheerfully, I want to take care of Amara well. She won't have to work again after marriage. The old woman looked at him for a long moment. That is generous, she said slowly, but why must she stop what she loves? Samuel smiled wider. Because a wife's first duty is to her husband, not her business. I want her by my side always. Mama Ifioma said nothing more, but her eyes darkened. After he left, she turned to Amara. My child, be careful of a man who fears your strength. A husband who truly loves you will help you fly, not clip your wings. Amara nodded, but her heart wanted peace, not suspicion. She kept telling herself, love can fix anything. As the wedding drew closer, more cracks began to show. Samuel became impatient with small things. If her cooking wasn't perfect, if she didn't answer the phone quickly enough, or if she disagreed with him in front of others. One afternoon they were sitting under the mango tree where they used to laugh together. Amara mentioned inviting her sewing friends to the wedding. Samuel's face changed instantly. No, he said sharply. People from your shop don't need to come. They gossip too much. I don't want strangers at our ceremony. But they're my friends, she protested softly. His voice rose. I said no, Amara. You're not listening. Do you want me to look weak in front of my people? Tears filled her eyes. I didn't mean. Enough, he snapped, standing up. Then after a pause he smiled again, his voice calm. Forgive me. I just want everything to be perfect. Amara nodded, swallowing her pain. That night, she cried silently but still prayed for him. God, please make him gentle again, she whispered. As weeks passed, Samuel's words grew sharper, his patience thinner. Sometimes he would scold her for no reason, accusing her of things she didn't do. One evening when she arrived home late after a long day of sewing, he said coldly, "A woman who stays out too long learns bad habits." "I was finishing work," Amara explained, but he turned away. Her world began to shrink. She stopped laughing freely. She stopped visiting her friends. Even at church, she felt the weight of his eyes on her, watching every move. When people greeted her, she smiled faintly but her joy was gone. Chidinma noticed the change. "You're not yourself anymore," she said one afternoon. "This isn't love, Amara. Love doesn't make you small." Amara wanted to defend Samuel, but the words caught in her throat. Deep down she knew Chidinma was right. Her heart was tired and her spirit felt trapped. At home, Mama Ifeoma grew more silent, watching her granddaughter fade. One night she said quietly, "My child, a woman who loses her peace in love must ask herself if it is truly love." Amara looked at her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mama, I don't know anymore. I just want the man I met at the church, the kind one who prayed and smiled." Her grandmother took her hand gently. "Maybe that man was never real," she said softly. "Sometimes the devil dresses in white robes to stand at the altar." Those words stayed in Amara's heart long after the lamps went out. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Samuel's voice echo in her mind, "A good wife must obey, not speak." The next morning she looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes had lost their shine. Her smile was thin. She whispered to herself, "Is this what love feels like?" And for the first time she didn't have an answer. But deep within her, a small spark of awareness began to flicker, the first hint that maybe her grandmother had been right all along. The same church bells that once rang for her joy now sounded like warnings in her ears. She began to wonder, had she fallen in love with a man of God, or just a man who knew how to act like one? That evening, the sky over Iziaha was dim and golden, and the church bells were ringing softly in the distance. Amara walked quickly along the dusty road that led to the small white church. She was early for choir practice, and the town was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the rustling of palm leaves in the wind. She carried her songbook in one hand and a small lamp in the other. Her heart felt heavy though she didn't know why. For weeks she had been praying for peace, for Samuel to become kind again, for their love to feel whole. But instead of peace there was silence. Each day Samuel grew more distant, more distracted. He often left her messages unanswered and gave excuses she could not understand. When Amara entered the church compound, she noticed a faint light coming from the back hall. It was unusual. No one used that part of the building except during big events. She paused for a moment, listening. That was when she heard it, a low laugh, familiar yet strange. Then came a voice, Samuel's. At first, her heart lifted in relief. "He's here early too," she thought. But then another voice followed, a woman's. The laughter between them was quiet, soft, and full of something she didn't want to name. Her steps slowed. Her fingers trembled around the lamp. She moved closer, each heartbeat echoing in her chest. "Samuel," the woman whispered, "someone might come." "No one will," he replied, his tone gentle in a way Amara hadn't heard in months. "Everyone trusts me here." The words cut like glass. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She felt cold, as if the air itself had turned against her. For a moment she wanted to turn back, to pretend she had heard nothing. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. Maybe she was just tired. But her feet moved forward anyway. She reached the door of the back hall and pushed it open slowly. Inside, the lamplight flickered on the walls. Samuel stood close to a woman from the choir, Nkechi, the same woman who often complimented Amara's voice after service. The look on both their faces said everything. Samuel stepped back, startled, his face turning red. "Amara," he said sharply. The woman quickly grabbed her shawl and hurried past, eyes down, mumbling something Amara couldn't hear. Amara stood frozen, her hands shaking, her voice lost. "Samuel," she whispered. "What is this?" He frowned, angry rather than ashamed. "You should have knocked," he said coldly. "You shouldn't be spying." "Spying?" Her voice broke. "You're saying this is my fault?" Samuel looked away, running a hand over his head. "You wouldn't understand. You always think you're perfect. I needed someone who listens." Amara felt her heart shatter in silence. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why, but her tears spoke for her. The man she thought was guided by faith had betrayed her not only with another woman but also with lies dressed as prayers. She turned away without another word and walked out of the church. The night wind blew through the palm trees, carrying the faint sound of the choir beginning their rehearsal. She didn't join them. She couldn't. Her feet carried her home like a ghost, her lamp trembling in her hand. When she reached her grandmother's hut, she dropped to her knees at the doorway, tears falling like rain. Mama Ifeoma came quickly, her face full of concern. "Amara, what is it?" Amara tried to speak but her voice cracked. Finally she whispered, "Mama, I saw him, Samuel, with another woman, in the church." The old woman sighed deeply, her eyes soft with both sadness and wisdom. She drew Amara close and let her cry against her chest. "Hush, my child," she said gently, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "You needed to see this even if it breaks you." Amara wept until her eyes ached. Between sobs she whispered, "He prayed with me. He told me God brought us together." Mama Ifeoma nodded slowly. "Yes, he prayed. But not every voice raised in prayer is holy, Amara. Some use God's name to hide their sins. Faith without truth is just noise, and you have now heard the difference." Her words fell softly but struck deeply. Amara felt the truth settle in her heart, heavy but clear. That night she could not sleep. She sat outside under the moonlight, the same place where she and Samuel once talked about their dreams. The world looked different now, colder but somehow realer. The illusion was gone. She remembered all the signs she had ignored, the control, the anger, the way he spoke about obedience as if love was a cage. She had mistaken his power for protection, his words for wisdom. Now she understood. Sometimes the people who claimed to walk closest to the light cast the darkest shadows. By dawn, Amara's tears had dried. She felt weak, but inside her, something began to stir, a quiet strength she didn't know she had. When her grandmother came outside with a cup of warm tea, Amara took it and smiled faintly. "I was blind," she said softly. "No," Mama Ifeoma replied. "You were pure of heart. But now you see. That is the gift hidden inside the pain." Amara nodded slowly. She looked at the rising sun and whispered, "Then I will use my eyes well." From that morning on, Amara didn't hide her face in shame. She went to church but not to see Samuel. She went to pray for strength, for herself, and for others who might one day walk the same painful road. And as she knelt before the altar, she realized something she had never understood before, that faith was not proven by loud prayers or fancy words, but by truth, humility, and love that does no harm. The woman who once saw love only through her heart was now learning to see it through her spirit, and this time, her eyes were open. The next morning, the town of Eziaha woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of cooking fires, but Amara sat quietly by the riverbank, away from the noise. The soft wind moved across the water, making tiny ripples that caught the sunlight. She sat with her feet in the cool stream, staring at the reflection of her face. It was tired but calm. Her eyes, once full of excitement and dreams, now carried a deeper kind of strength, the kind that comes after pain. She had not slept much that night. Her heart had wrestled with memories, the laughter, the songs in church, the way Samuel had looked at her when he proposed. Those moments still lived in her, but they no longer had power. They were like pages from an old book, things she had read and learned from but no longer believed in. As the morning sun rose higher, her grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, came walking down the path with a small basket of garden herbs. She stopped beside her granddaughter and watched the river too. For a while they said nothing. Finally Mama Ifeoma spoke softly, "You are quiet today." Amara nodded. "I am thinking," she said. "About him." Amara smiled sadly. "About me," she answered. "For too long I prayed for Samuel to change. But now I see that I should have prayed for my own eyes to open sooner." Her grandmother touched her shoulder gently. "Pain can blind but it can also teach," she said. Amara sighed and looked up at the sky. "I loved him, Mama. But love built on lies will always fall. I cannot build my life on something that breaks every time truth touches it." Mama Ifeoma smiled faintly. "You speak wisely now. That is growth, my child." Amara nodded slowly. She felt a strange calm settle over her heart, not happiness yet, but peace. It was the peace that comes when a decision is already made, even before the words are spoken. By afternoon the sun was high, and she heard a knock on the wooden door of her home. When she opened it, Samuel stood there. He looked uneasy, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes restless. He held his Bible under one arm as if it would protect him from guilt. "Amara," he began softly, "please can we talk?" She stood still for a moment, then nodded. "Come in." He stepped inside, glancing around nervously. "I know you're angry," he said quickly. "What happened last night, it was a mistake. I was weak. But you know I love you. You know how much I care for you. Let's forget this and move on. We can still marry. Everyone expects it." Amara watched him carefully. His words sounded smooth, but his eyes did not hold truth. They darted around like a man hiding from his own shadow. She shook her head slowly. "You want me to forget, Samuel? To pretend nothing happened? That your lies are just mistakes?" He frowned, his voice hardening. "You're judging me now? Even after all our prayers together?" Amara took a deep breath. "Yes, I prayed with you," she said quietly. "But now I see, you were only praying to look holy, not to be holy." He looked away, his jaw tight. "You don't understand what men go through," he muttered. "No man is perfect." "Then be honest about your flaws," she replied. "Don't hide behind the name of God to cover your wrongs. That's not imperfection, that's deceit." Her tone was calm, but every word carried strength. She reached for the small ring he had given her, the one that once made her heart flutter, and placed it in his hand. "I will not marry you, Samuel," she said firmly. "Not because I don't care, but because I care about truth more than shame. I would rather walk alone than stand beside a man who wears faith like a mask." He blinked, speechless. "Amara, think about what you're saying." "I have," she interrupted softly. "And this is what I choose." He stared at her for a long moment. His lips moved as if to argue, but no words came. Finally he turned and walked out, his shoulders stiff with anger and embarrassment. Amara stood by the doorway watching him go. For a moment the old ache in her chest returned, that quiet, painful tug of love that didn't know how to die. But then as the door closed behind him she felt something new, relief. The air in the room felt lighter. The world outside seemed brighter. The silence that followed was not empty, it was clean, like the first breath after a storm. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling but her spirit steady. Tears filled her eyes, not of weakness but of release. She whispered a prayer, not for Samuel this time but for herself. "God, teach me to love with wisdom, not blindness. Teach me to listen to truth even when it hurts." Later that evening Amara walked back to the river. The water shimmered with orange light from the setting sun. She looked at her reflection again, and for the first time in many weeks she smiled. She wasn't the same woman who had once believed that every man in the church was good, or that love meant silence. She was learning, slowly, deeply, that real faith is not about pretending everything is holy but about being honest when it isn't. As she stood there, the wind moved through the trees, gentle and warm. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring again. But this time the sound didn't make her heart ache. It reminded her of freedom, of starting over with clearer eyes. She picked up a small pebble and threw it into the river, watching the ripples spread wider and wider, like her own strength finding space in the world again. Then quietly she whispered to herself, "I forgive him. But I'm free." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara turned and walked home, her steps steady, her heart lighter than it had been in a long, long time. Months rolled by, and life in Iziaha returned to its gentle rhythm. The morning markets bustled again, children ran through the dusty streets, and the church bell rang every Sunday as it always had. But something had changed, not in the town but in Amara. She walked with a different kind of grace now. Her steps were slower but sure. Her smile carried peace, not excitement, strength, not naivete. Every scar that heartbreak had left in her was now a quiet reminder of what she had survived. She returned to her sewing shop and poured her heart into her work. Her shop soon became known not just for its fine dresses but for the calm, wise woman who made them. Women came to her for clothes, but many stayed to talk. They found comfort in her words, in the way she listened without judgment and spoke without anger. One afternoon, a young woman named Ifeanyi came to pick up her wedding gown. She was glowing with excitement, her eyes shining with dreams. But as she turned to leave she paused and said, "Sister Amara, I'm a little scared. Everyone says marriage is joy, but my fiancé, sometimes he talks to me in ways that make me small. Maybe I'm overthinking it." Amara looked up from her sewing table and smiled gently. "Fear is not overthinking, my dear," she said. "When peace disappears, something is wrong. Don't ignore it just because it wears a holy smile." Ifeanyi blinked, surprised by her words. "But he prays," she whispered, as if that could fix everything. Amara chuckled softly, her voice calm but steady. "Prayers can be beautiful, but they are not proof of goodness. Look for honesty, patience and peace, those are the real signs of love." Ifyinanya nodded slowly. She didn't say more, but her eyes held thought. When she left, Amara sighed deeply, whispering a silent prayer that the young woman would see truth before pain. That evening, the sun painted the sky orange and gold as Amara sat outside her shop, mending a torn dress. Children ran past, laughing, and one little girl, Adiz, the pastor's daughter, stopped beside her. "Auntie Amara," she asked curiously, "Mama said you are very wise now. How did you become wise?" Amara laughed softly, her eyes kind. "I listened to pain until it started teaching me," she said. The little girl frowned. "Pain teaches?" "Oh yes," Amara said, nodding. "It teaches what peace really feels like. It teaches you to see beyond smiles and promises." Adiz looked confused but smiled anyway before running off. Amara watched her go and smiled faintly. "May your lessons be gentle," she murmured. As the days passed, more people began to visit Amara, not for gossip but for guidance. Even older women came to sit beside her, talking about their marriages, their daughters, their worries. She listened patiently, never bitter, never proud. She had found purpose in her pain, turning what once broke her into something that could heal others. On Sunday mornings, she sat at the back of the church now, no longer singing in the choir but watching with quiet awareness. The drums still played, but not by Samuel's hands. He had left Iziaha soon after their broken engagement, quietly without farewell. Some said he moved to another town, others said he joined a new church. No one really knew, and Amara never asked. There was no anger left in her heart, only understanding. Sometimes she prayed for him too, not with longing but with mercy. "May he learn truth as I did," she would whisper. Her grandmother often sat beside her during the services, their hands resting together on the same Bible. Mama Ifeoma would sometimes look at her with proud eyes and say softly, "You were tested by love, but you passed by truth." Amara would smile. "I just learned to see clearly," she'd reply. One afternoon during a women's meeting at the church, Amara was asked to speak. She hesitated at first, she was no preacher, just a tailor. But when she stood in front of the group, her voice was calm and her words clear. "I once thought love was only about faith and prayer," she began. "I thought if someone lifted their hands in church they must have a good heart. But I learned that a man can pray loudly and still live wrongly. True love is not found in the sound of prayers, but in the peace it gives you. When you feel peace you know you are safe. When you feel fear you must listen." The women nodded quietly. Some wiped their eyes. Others whispered to themselves, thinking of their own lives. Amara continued softly, "Don't rush because the church approves. Don't marry because people cheer. God doesn't measure love by how loud the wedding songs are. He measures it by the kindness that stays when no one is watching." When she finished, the church was silent. Then, slowly they began to clap. Not the loud kind of applause that comes from excitement, but the gentle, grateful kind that comes from truth. From that day on, people began to speak of her story as a lesson, one they shared again and again. Mothers told it to their daughters. Pastors mentioned it during youth meetings. And whenever someone brought up her name they would say, "She is the one who saw beyond the prayers." Years later, Amara's small sewing shop became a meeting place for women who wanted to learn, not just about stitching but about life, patience, and wisdom. She taught them to sew and to see. And her words, spoken once in a small women's gathering, became a saying known across Iziaha. "Don't judge love by the prayers you hear, judge it by the peace it brings." It was simple yet powerful. Those who heard it carried it in their hearts, repeating it to their daughters, their friends, even their sons. Amara never married again. She was not bitter, only content. Her life was full, not with romance but with purpose. The love she once looked for in a man she now found in her faith, her work, and her people. One evening as the sun set and the church bell rang in the distance, Amara sat by her window watching the children play. Her heart felt calm, her mind at rest. She whispered a quiet prayer, not asking for anything but giving thanks. "Thank you, Lord," she said softly, "for opening my eyes before my heart was lost." The wind carried her words gently into the night. And from that day her story lived on, not as a tale of heartbreak but as a warning wrapped in wisdom. Before you marry anybody from the church, watch not just their faith, but their heart. That was the truth she left behind.